Right in the middle of my vacation, my son sent me a short message saying that even though it was my beach house, he and his wife wanted private time with her parents and asked me to stay in a hotel instead. And I calmly replied that I understood, even though my heart felt heavy, because that message pushed me to make a final decision that would change everything. And just 1 hour later, something happened that shocked everyone and made my in-laws turn against their own daughter. But before I continue, dear listeners, I want to ask you a small favor. If this story touches you in any way, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you are listening from, because it truly means a lot to know how far these words travel. That day, the sun in the low country was strong and tiring, the kind of heat that makes the air feel thick and leaves you drained by evening, with the dry smell of nature and constant background noise filling the space. Yet on the terrace of Indigo Point, the feeling was not just about the weather, it was about the cold and uncomfortable silence sitting at the table. I stood in my own kitchen cutting a sweet watermelon, remembering how I had designed this house myself 20 years ago, how I chose every detail from the way the windows faced the sunset to the tiles in the counters, and how every corner held my effort and hard work. Yet on that day, I felt invisible in my own home, like someone who was only there to serve and clean and then step aside. At the table outside under the shaded roof, my son Sterling sat quietly, avoiding my eyes, his shoulders low. And in that moment I didn't see a grown man, I saw the little boy he used to be, the one who once hid behind me when he was scared, except now he wasn't hiding with me anymore, and that realization hurt more than the heat ever could. He wasn't just quiet. He was clearly avoiding me, and across from him sat my daughter-in-law's parents, Thaddeus and Zenobia Vance, calmly eating the fish I had cooked as if they were doing it a favor, while Zenobia, covered in heavy gold jewelry that looked completely out of place for a simple beach meal, wiped her mouth, pushed her plate away, and loudly complained that the fish was dry and that a restaurant in Savannah had done it better, with Thaddeus barely reacting as he stayed focused on his phone and muttered a short reply. But the strongest voice at the table belonged to Karis, my daughter-in-law, who sat confidently at the head of my table, pouring cold wine and looking around the terrace like she already owned the place, talking excitedly about how they planned to change the house by removing walls, adding big windows, and even getting rid of my garden, waving her glass toward the rose bushes I had carefully grown for years and calling everything old-fashioned, while Sterling quickly agreed with her without thinking, just to keep the peace. I stood there holding the plate of watermelon, feeling a heavy weight settle inside me as they talked about changing and tearing down my life's work as if I didn't exist. And when Karis sharply ordered me to bring more wine and ice without even looking at me, snapping her fingers like I was staff, her parents exchanged small, knowing smiles, making it clear that in their world some people give orders and others follow them, and even though this was my home, I was being treated like someone who was only allowed to stay as long as I kept serving. So I took a slow breath, reminded myself to stay calm, and counted to 3 because I knew acting in anger would only make things worse. That I have always believed that anger is dangerous because once feelings take over, they can ruin even the strongest plans. And as an architect I knew that when something starts to crack, you can't fix it by pretending everything is fine. But that day I chose to stay calm for my son and for the thin piece I thought I still needed to protect. So I quietly said I would bring the wine, placed the watermelon down, picked up the empty bottle, and walked into the cooler, quiet part of the house where I leaned against the wall and tried to slow my racing heart, reminding myself that I had survived much harder times in life and could survive this too. When I came back, Zenobia looked at me with a cold and curious stare and made a comment about how I did everything myself and had nothing better to do, but I said nothing and just poured the wine, feeling my patience being stretched to its limit. And suddenly I realized I had to get out, so I said I needed to go to the market for figs and olives, grabbed my bag and left without even changing, letting the bright sun and the walk toward the sea clear my head, until the noise of the waves and the busy market filled with people, voices, and the smell of food slowly helped me feel like myself again. The market air was filled with the smell of herbs and smoked fish, and I stopped at a familiar stall to choose ripe figs, dark and soft, their skins ready to split, picking the best ones out of habit because I was still thinking about the people back at the house, when my phone suddenly vibrated in the pocket of my dress and I squinted at the screen under the bright sun to see a message from Sterling, and for a second my heart lifted as I hoped he might be reaching out to make things right. But the moment I read his words, everything inside me went quiet, because he politely explained that even though it was my beach house, his wife's parents felt uneasy and they wanted privacy, so they asked me to move to a hotel for a few days. I stood frozen in the middle of the busy market while people walked around me, barely hearing their voices, realizing that he had just called my home your beach house, and was asking me to leave it. And strangely, instead of crying or getting angry, I felt a clear and calm understanding settle in, as if I finally saw the truth I had been ignoring for years. So I didn't argue or explain myself. I simply replied with one word, closed the chat, and instead of looking for a hotel, I opened my contacts and called a man I hadn't spoken to in a long time, Desmond from Luxury Real Estate. And as I stood there holding a bag of figs they would never eat and looking toward the shining sea, I calmly told him that I was putting Indigo Point up for sale. I told him I needed a buyer the same day, right away, and after ending the call I threw the bag of figs into the nearest trash bin, watching them hit the bottom and realizing that sound marked the end of my old life. Then I walked away from the market, not back to the house, but straight toward the waterfront where Desmond's office sat behind wide glass windows. The cool air and the smell of fresh coffee greeted me as I stepped inside, and Desmond, who had known me for years and remembered every fight I had gone through to build Indigo Point, immediately stood up and looked at me with surprise, noticing how my simple clothes didn't match the firm look in my eyes. But I didn't waste time explaining and told him clearly that I needed not just a showing but a full deal that very day. He tried to remind me how real estate usually works, but I calmly explained that all the papers were ready, the house was fully mine, and I wanted a buyer with cash who could take it immediately. And when he asked if something had happened, I simply said that I was starting a new chapter and didn't need old walls anymore. After thinking for a moment, he mentioned a wealthy developer who had wanted the place for a long time and was in town. And I told him to call right away and say the owner was ready to show the house in an hour and that the only condition was that the current temporary residents would have to leave at once. And Desmond, clearly surprised but curious, picked up the phone and made the call. Desmond called the buyer and briefly explained that the owner was ready to sell the house that very day. And when he asked about the price, he looked at me and I wrote down a number that would guarantee me a peaceful and comfortable life anywhere I chose. And the man on the phone laughed and said if the place was as good as promised, he would take it without even seeing it and would be at the gates in 40 minutes. Desmond suggested we sign a quick agreement so I wouldn't change my mind. And as I put my signature on the paper, my hand stayed steady because I wasn't giving up a house. I was taking back my independence. And with every line I signed, I felt years of pressure lifting from my shoulders, reminding myself that I was no longer just someone who served others but a woman in control of her own life again. Before going back, I stopped at a nearby shop, chose a simple but elegant scarf and dark glasses that made me feel confident and composed, sat for a short while at a cafe with a cup of coffee, and instead of feeling nervous, I felt ready, even excited, knowing they believed I would quietly leave, while in truth I was about to change everything. So I opened my phone, checked my bank records and my property papers to remind myself of one final truth before making the next move. I saved the file in a separate folder, protected it with a password, and then opened my messaging app to find the Vances contact, a number I had kept for emergencies but never used. Before attached the file, wrote a short note saying it was a gift for the family and that I would share the password when we met, and sent it, imagining their phones lighting up at the same time and their curiosity slowly growing even though they couldn't open it yet. A moment later Desmond called to say the buyer had arrived and we needed to be there in 15 minutes, so I finished my coffee, took a taxi, and rode back toward Indigo Point, watching the sea and trees pass by, knowing the woman who had been pushed around was gone. And when I arrived, I saw the big black car at the gate, Desmond waiting nervously, and the buyer talking loudly on his phone. And as I greeted them calmly and opened the gate, we could already hear laughter and glasses clinking from inside, where they were enjoying themselves in my house, thinking they had won. And before leading the men inside, I turned to them and said there was just one small condition they needed to know first. Titus frowned when I quietly explained that there were people inside the house who didn't know it had been sold and believed they had the right to be there, and that I needed him to act not just as a buyer but as the new owner who would not accept any arguments. And his serious look quickly turned into a wide, pleased grin as he said he enjoyed removing unwanted guests even more than buying property. So we walked toward the house together while laughter and voices grew louder, and when I opened the glass doors, the cheerful mood vanished in an instant as everyone froze, with Sterling staring in shock, Karis slowly standing up and trying to smile, and her parents looking at me like I didn't belong there. But I stood calm and confident with two well-dressed men behind me. Sterling tried to speak first, confused and nervous, but Karis quickly stepped in, pretending to be polite and acting as if I had just come back for forgotten things, even reaching into her bag as if to offer me some money to send me away. while her parents supported her and made rude comments about my guests. But instead of feeling small or embarrassed, I looked at them all steadily, knowing that for the first time in a long while, the situation was no longer in their control and that this little performance they were putting on was about to come to a very sudden end. That I didn't say a word and just looked at them through my dark glasses while Karis pulled out a $50 bill and held it toward me like she was doing me a favor, loudly telling me to take it and go eat somewhere else, while Sterling sat with his head down, spinning his glass and quietly asking me to leave so I wouldn't embarrass them, and that single word felt final and painful, so I slowly took off my glasses, looked at them calmly, walked past Karis without even touching the money, and stood in the middle of the room before calling Mr. Banks inside. Titus stepped forward confidently, brushing past Karis, looked around the room like he already owned it, and praised the space and the light, which made Karis and her parents panic and start shouting, demanding to know who he was and threatening to call security. But instead of arguing with them, I continued calmly describing the house like it was a showing, and Titus played along, checking the walls and floors and approving them. And as we walked toward the balcony through the shocked group, Karis suddenly grabbed my arm, digging her nails into my skin, and hissed at me. In anger and fear, asking what I thought I was doing, Karis shouted at me, clutching my arm, accusing me of ruining everything in front of her parents and demanding I leave. But I calmly looked at her hand and then into her face, saying quietly but firmly, "Get your hands off me. And don't interrupt the showing," which made her recoil as if burned. Zenobia blinked in confusion, asking what showing I meant, and I turned to her, Thaddeus, Sterling, and finally Titus, raising my voice so everyone could hear. "Mr. Banks, how do you like the house?" He answered confidently, "I'll take it. Prime location, solid house. We discussed the price. Transfer the money in an hour if the keys are on the table." The room fell silent, the kind of silence so heavy it could be sliced with a knife, and Karis whispered, pale and shaking, "What do you mean take it?" I smiled, not kindly but like a strategist delivering checkmate, and explained that the house was sold, that the current occupants were temporary and would vacate within the hour. Karis screamed at her parents, calling me delusional, claiming I had dementia and didn't understand, but Thaddeus frowned, confused, demanding an explanation, and Karis scrambled to lie, insisting the house was theirs because they'd paid the mortgage and invested millions, while Titus, sneering, cut her off. He had seen the documents and the house was in my name alone, clear and unencumbered. Karis opened her mouth again to argue, but no words came. Her carefully built lies were crumbling under the weight of the truth. Calmly, I walked to the coffee table where the champagne and my folder from Desmond's office waited, ready to deliver the final proof. I opened the folder, pulled out the original property deed, thick paper with watermarks and an official seal, and placed it directly in front of Thaddeus Vance. "Read it, Thaddeus," I said calmly. "You've always trusted documents more than words." Slowly, almost reluctantly, he picked up the paper, his large hands trembling slightly, put on his reading glasses and scanned the text. He read aloud, noting the land purchase from 2001 and the certificate of occupancy from 2005, then lowered the paper, his voice chillingly quiet. "Karis, you told us you and Sterling bought this house 3 years ago, that you took out a huge loan, that you needed our help with the down payment." "Dad, Karis stammered backward while Thaddeus continued, his voice building like an avalanche, recounting the $5,000 a month sent for 3 years to cover a mortgage that didn't exist. I stood silently, letting the truth speak for itself. "Where is the mortgage?" Karis screamed, pounding the table so hard the glasses jumped. "Where is the loan? This house was built 20 years ago. It belongs to his mother." I looked at Sterling, who hid his face in his hands. "Mom, there is no mortgage," I said quietly, locking eyes with Zenobia. "I built this house myself. I never borrowed a penny. I never received $1 from you." The room went still. Thaddeus's face turned purple, the color rising from his neck like molten mercury, and he wheezed, $5,000 every month. For 3 years. That's $180,000. Where is that money, Karis?" Cornered, Karis tried her usual tactic, attack to defend. "Dad, you don't understand. We invested in the house. Renovations. The tiles. The windows. The plumbing. The roof." I couldn't help but let out a short, dry laugh. "Renovations," I repeated, walking to the wall and letting my hand glide over the textured plaster, letting every word, every gesture, underline the truth that their lies were collapsing around them. I calmly explained the truth. Karis, this plaster was applied in 2010, hand-finished in Italian style, and it's still perfect because I maintain it. The floor tiles are from the 2008 vintage collection. I installed the windows 5 years ago before your marriage. There were no renovations here. Not a single nail was driven with your money. Karis shrieked, pointing her manicured finger at me. You're just an old miser. Silence fell like a hammer, then Thaddeus roared, shaking the chandelier. He stepped forward, looming over her. Don't you dare insult the woman in whose house you live and lie to our faces. Renovations, you say? Plumbing? I'm a builder, Karis. I can tell when a house has stood untouched for 10 years. You took us for fools. Zenobia, who had been frozen in shock, suddenly sobbed, clutching her chest. Karis, baby, how could you? We saved from Dad's retirement fund. We thought you were struggling. Sterling finally lowered his hands, pale as a sheet. I didn't know, he whispered, horrified. I thought they were just gifts. Thaddeus exploded. Gifts the size of an executive salary? Do you have eyes? You never noticed where the furs, cars, trips to Tulum came from while you sat at your office as a junior associate. Sterling shrank under the weight of the truth, not evil, just blind and convenient. He had been a tool in Karis's plan, like her parents, weak and easy to manipulate. The tension was thick until Titus, leaning against the doorframe with a toothpick in his mouth, cut through it with a booming voice. Time is money. Deal's still on, or do I call my guys to help with the eviction? I've got a demolition crew ready to break a wall tomorrow morning. The words hit the Vances like cold water. They were in a stranger's house that had just been sold, and the new owner wasn't someone to argue with. Zenobia gasped. Demolition? Tomorrow? But our flight isn't for 3 days. Titus shrugged. Not my problem, ma'am. Hyatt downtown, deluxe suite, ocean view, whatever you like. Need me to call a cab? Thaddeus sank heavily into his chair, all his arrogance and bluster gone. Before us sat a tired, defeated man who had finally realized the truth. He had been deceived, and the daughter he raised had become something unrecognizable. Aaliyah, he said, addressing me for the first time with respect instead of contempt, forgive us. We were misled. We thought, I cut him off sharply. You thought I was a poor relative living off your daughter's success. You thought you were feeding me, not that I was providing you shelter. You humiliated me in my own home because you believed that whoever pays the piper calls the tune. But you weren't paying me. You were paying for lies. Thaddeus slowly nodded, silent, acknowledging every word. You were right. We were wrong. We'll pack immediately. Karis, panicked, grabbed his arm. Dad, are you giving up? She's bluffing. She didn't sell the house. This is Sterling's inheritance. You can't. I stepped toward her, calm but firm. I was obligated to raise a son. I did. I was obligated to give him an education. I did. But I am not obligated to support his weakness or your greed. This house is my pension, Karis. And I just cashed it out. I nodded to Desmond. Get the sales contract. Mr. Banks, let's sign it here on the table while they pack. Desmond, silent until now, pulled the folder from his briefcase, laid the papers on the table and pushed aside a half-eaten plate of fish. He handed Titus a pen and the buyer signed with a flourish. Done. Money sent. Check your account, Miss Aaliyah. My phone pinged and I pulled it out, feeling the final confirmation of what had just been accomplished. A notification from the bank lit up my phone. 6 zeros. Money received, I said, holding the screen for Karis to see. This house is officially no longer mine, and certainly not yours. You have 45 minutes to vacate. Time starts now. Karis froze, staring at the screen as her world unraveled. Not just the house, but her scheme, her status, her control. No, she whispered. Then Sterling did something I hadn't expected. He stood, stepped in front of her and gripped her shoulders. Where is my parents' money? He demanded. She jerked back. Get off. Not now. Can't you see we're being kicked out? Forget the house. Sterling shouted for the first time at his wife. Where is the $180,000? What did you spend it on? On us, she shrieked. On your car? Your clothes? So we could live like people. Sterling shot back, furious. My car is financed with my paycheck. You said you only helped with the down payment. And the rest? Clothes, retreats in Dubai. Thaddeus interjected, his voice like a hammer. Yes, you wanted to live beautifully. And you're misers. millions in your accounts, yet you begrudge your daughter. Karis broke down, mascara smearing her face. I have the right, she cried. Thaddeus's voice cut like a verdict. You are a thief. You lied to your husband. You humiliated his mother. He turned to Sterling. Pack your bags. Are you coming to the hotel with us? We have a lot to discuss. Sterling nodded, broken but with a glimmer of clarity in his eyes. Karis, however, refused to surrender. Realizing her grip was slipping from everyone, her parents, her husband, the situation, she wiped her tears, straightened and faced us with the triumphant, unhinged smile of someone desperate. You can't kick me out, she said quietly, and Sterling isn't going anywhere. And you, Dad, won't leave me. Titus, arms crossed, raised an eyebrow. Why is that? Titus watched with obvious amusement as Karis placed a hand on her flat stomach. Because I'm pregnant, she shouted. You're going to have a grandson and heir. You won't throw a pregnant woman out. Aaliyah, you're going to be a grandmother. You wouldn't dare. Silence fell again, thick and heavy. Sterling froze, his mouth slightly open, a flicker of hope lighting his eyes, as if this news could undo everything, as if the nightmare might have a bright side. Pregnant? He whispered, stepping uncertainly toward her. Karis, is it true? Zenobia gasped, clutching her chest, while Thaddeus's anger wavered, faltering against the weight of family legacy. I looked at Karis, saw her eyes darting across the room, measuring reactions, and I knew instantly, this pose, this act was too perfect, too rehearsed. Pregnant? Sterling repeated, voice trembling between fear and hope. Why didn't you say anything? Karis shifted seamlessly into fragile mother-to-be mode, sobbing softly. I wanted it to be a surprise, a special moment for the whole family. You stressed me out, it's harmful for the baby. Zenobia rushed to her daughter, ignoring the missing millions. The grandmother instinct overrode logic. Oh baby, you shouldn't be upset. We can't do this to her. Thaddeus's face was still red with anger, but the news unsettled him. Tradition held that a grandson could redeem sins. Titus, shifting impatiently, muttered, All right, the soap opera continues. Ms. Yulia, what's the decision? Evicting the future mother or what? All eyes turned to me, Karis defiant, Sterling pleading, the Vances expectant. They wanted my heart softened, my resolve melted by the word, grandmother. But I wasn't looking at them. I focused on the table. Among the remains of the luxurious lunch sat a half-empty vintage brut bottle, another unopened, and a glass near Karis's plate with a golden liquid still swirling at the bottom. I walked slowly, deliberately to the table and picked up the bottle by its neck. The glass was warm in my hand. Strange, Karis, I said, my voice cutting through the stunned silence like a bell. Very strange. Her eyes widened, panic flashing for the first time. What do you mean strange? She snapped. Strange diet for a pregnant woman, I replied, lifting the bottle so everyone could see the label. Brewed Imperial, 12% alcohol. You drank almost the entire bottle at lunch. I poured for you twice and you demanded more. Karis paled, stammering, That's non-alcoholic. No, darling, I said firmly. This is vintage wine from my cellar. I know every bottle and you know perfectly well what alcohol tastes like. You drank, laughed, and demanded a refill. A woman who truly cares for her child wouldn't pour a liter of champagne into herself in this heat. Sterling stared at the bottle, then at his wife's empty glass, then at her face. You were drinking, he said, voice hollow. I saw it. 3 glasses. Karis, you're lying. I just took a sip, she shouted, retreating. 1 sip for the mood. Doctors allow it. Doctors allow getting drunk until your neck is flushed? Thaddeus barked, stepping forward, grabbing her chin, forcing her to look at him. Breathe, Karis. Breathe. She jerked away, but the movement only betrayed her further. The smell of alcohol now confirmed the truth. You're not pregnant, Thaddeus said, disgust plain in his voice as he wiped his hand on his trousers. You're a liar, willing to invent a child to save your own skin. Karis collapsed into a chair, sobbing. I thought I was pregnant. I was late. I didn't take a test. Enough. Thaddeus thundered, turning to Sterling. Listen carefully, son. I am a tough man but fair. This woman, he pointed at the sobbing Karis, is consumed by greed and lies. She stole from us. She humiliated your mother. She invented a child to manipulate everyone. If you leave with her now, if you forgive this, you are dead to me. She gets nothing. No will, no accounts, no money. And you, if you stay, will live on your junior associate's salary and pay her debts. And trust me, there are plenty. Sterling froze, stunned, torn, looking at the hysterical, pathetic woman before him, then at me, calm and composed beside the new owners of the house. He looked at his father-in-law, the choice clear: honor or ruin. Karis reached for him, wailing, desperation in her eyes, but I stayed calm, letting Sterling hear his mother-in-law's words. Don't listen to them, son. I love you. We'll handle this. They just want to separate you, Zenobia said softly, stepping closer and taking his hand, her eyes brimming with tears. Separate? What do you mean? Sterling whispered. She will destroy you, Zenobia said, her voice heavy with genuine fear. Run, son. Divorce her. Send her to us. Rehab, a convent. I don't know. Just save yourself. Sterling looked at his mother-in-law, and in that honest, aching gaze, all his doubts crumbled. Slowly, he freed his hand from Karis's desperate grip. I'm filing for divorce, he said quietly, his tone steady for the first time in years. What? Karis froze. I'm filing for divorce, he repeated firmer, his eyes on me. I don't believe a single word you say anymore. I'm done being fooled. He added quietly, Mom, forgive me. I was blind. I nodded. I wanted to embrace him like in the old days, but now wasn't the time. I forgive you, son. The house is sold and you leave with them. I understand. He lowered his head. I'll go to a hotel. Babe, I need to think. Excellent, Titus said, clapping. Drama over. Finale clear. Exit stage left. The Vances moved efficiently. Thaddeus grabbed the resisting Karis by the elbow. Zenobia picked up her purse. Sterling got his jacket. Karis screamed, cursed, threatened lawsuits, but her father dragged her like a bulldozer. 5 minutes later, their car screeched out of the gates. The terrace grew quiet. Only me, Desmond, Titus, and the rhythm of the sea remained. Titus winked at me, pulling out a cigar. Beautifully done. Just like the movies. Money's in the account, papers signed. When do you hand over the keys? I walked to the terrace railing, watching the sun sink into the ocean, turning it molten gold. This view, this house was worth more than money. I turned to him. Not now. Not like this, Mr. Banks. How about we rewrite the ending? Titus exhaled a thick cloud of smoke, letting the sea breeze carry it away, squinting at me like a poker player reading an opponent. Rewrite the ending? He repeated, flicking ash onto my roses. On any other day I might have scolded him, but today it felt trivial. Mulia, the signatures are set, the money's sent. We're done, he said. But I smiled, knowing the story wasn't over, not by my rules. Legally, you are standing on my balcony, I said firmly. Desmond, my longtime realtor, shifted nervously, dabbing at his glasses and glancing uneasily between me and his large client. Aaliyah, what are you doing? The sale is done. The deed is recorded, the scan's already sent. You can't just... I cut him off without looking away from Titus. The transfer isn't final yet. We can reverse it as an error or cancel the contract together right now. Titus leaned on the railing, towering over me, and asked, why? You got a fantastic price and removed all the dead weight. Why fight for this house that only holds bad memories? If I were you, I'd take the money and leave. I looked at the darkening sea and answered calmly, this house isn't about betrayal, Mr. Banks. It's about my life, my hard work. The betrayal was in the people, not the walls. They're gone, but the house remains, and I won't lose that. I sold it once to close the door on my past, but now I want it back. Desmond made a small sound of shock. Aaliyah, the commission. I reassured him, you'll keep your full percentage. Think of it as payment for an outstanding performance. His tension eased and all attention turned to Titus. He could refuse, kick me out, and be within his rights, but I had no room for hesitation. I met his gaze. What's my benefit? He asked. Time wasted, fuel planning. You want me gone? Fine. Return the full amount I received plus 5% for your time, effort, and for the show of removing my daughter-in-law. I noticed you enjoyed that part. Titus chuckled, the corners of his mouth twitching, clearly intrigued by the challenge. 5% is generous, but too low for a broken dream of a beach house. Titus said, and I felt my stomach tighten. If he refused, I'd be rich on paper but with nowhere to call home. 10, I said, steadying my voice. That's my final offer. It's a fair sum for an hour of your time. Titus laughed, a deep booming sound that made the seagulls scatter from the roof. He slapped the railing, his grin wide. Iron Lady Architect, I like that. You've got a spine, Miss Aaliyah. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the contract we'd signed just 20 minutes ago, twirling it in his hands. I knew the moment I met you, you weren't selling. I blinked, surprised. He tapped his temple. 30 years in business teaches you the difference between those who want to let go and those who fight for what's theirs. You touched these walls, looked at these grapes like they were part of your family. Sellers don't do that. With a swift rip, he tore the contract in half, then folded and tore it again, tossing the scraps into the ashtray. I'm not a thief, he said, serious now. I saw you were trapped, so I played along. And honestly, I never liked your daughter-in-law. Empty shell and fancy clothes. Consider this my way of restoring justice. Relief washed over me, my knees shaking as the tension eased. You refuse the 10% penalty? I asked, almost afraid of the answer. He grinned. Of course not. Business is business, but the house? It's yours. Desmond immediately began calling the bank to reverse the transaction as a technical error. Titus extended his massive warm hand. Pleasure doing business with a smart woman. Now if you don't mind, I'll finish a glass of that very brute your former tenant didn't drink. I shook his hand, smiling. With pleasure. I'll open a fresh bottle, that one's flat. Together we returned to the living room. The house was officially mine again. The silence, once heavy and threatening, now felt like calm and freedom. But in that quiet, a single sharp buzz rang out. My phone left on the table, demanding attention. The phone lit up with Sterling's name, vibrating insistently on the polished table as if it were alive, demanding my attention. A mix of old maternal worry and new, sharp detachment surged inside me. Titus, glass of fresh champagne in hand, raised an eyebrow, silently asking if I would answer or let Sterling stew. I let the call ring a few more times, then finally picked it up and put it on speaker. Mom. Sterling's voice was frantic, background noise of traffic and shouting women bleeding through the line. Can you hear me? This is a nightmare. I remained calm, taking a sip of chilled brute. I hear you, Sterling. What's happened? His voice rose. We didn't even make it to the hotel. Dad, Thaddeus, stopped the car on the highway, kicked Karis out. I arched an eyebrow and caught Titus's approving chuckle. Kicked her out? Right on the road. Yes, Sterling said, panicked. She was yelling, threatening lawsuits, insulting Zenobia, calling her an old fool. Then Dad slammed the brakes, threw her suitcase onto the shoulder and told her to walk. Maybe her brains would fall into place. In the background, Zenobia's weak voice trembled. Sterling, son, give me some water. My heart. Mom, Sterling continued, voice tight with panic. We're at a gas station. Zenobia is sick. Karis is back on the highway, throwing rocks at passing cars. What do I do? Go back for her or help Zenobia? I closed my eyes, frustrated. My 35-year-old son still needed me to tell him how to handle a situation he helped create through indecision. Sterling, I said firmly, call an ambulance for Zenobia if she is truly unwell. Stay with the parents your wife harmed. And Karis, she's a grown woman. She has a phone. She has money, the same money she stole from her parents. She'll manage. And Sterling, remember this. She is not just difficult, she is a criminal. I told him calmly but firmly that if he went back for her now, he would be choosing lies and becoming part of the same mess, and asked if that was really the life he wanted. There was a long pause, and I could hear his heavy breathing as he struggled with his old habit of trying to please everyone. Finally, he said no, that he wouldn't go back, and that he would go with the Vances to the police station because Thaddeus wanted to report what had happened. I told him he made the right choice and warned him it would be a long night. Then his voice softened and he asked if he could come to me afterward because he had nowhere else to go, since he had just found out even their city apartment was rented and not really theirs. I looked around my living room, at the empty chairs, at Titus studying my painting, at Desmond finishing his coffee, and I realized my home had just become peaceful again and I wasn't ready to invite new chaos inside. I told Sterling gently but firmly that he could not come to me, and when he sounded shocked, I explained that while I was here, my house was now a place for calm and clear thinking, not for confusion and weakness. I told him he was 35, that he should stay in a hotel, start solving his life on his own, and learn to stand without leaning on me. When he said I was abandoning him, I corrected him and said I was simply letting him grow, and that these were not the same thing. I told him to call me in a month when he had real plans and a clear direction, and then I ended the call. As I put the phone down, I felt empty inside, but it was a clean, peaceful emptiness, like a room that had just been aired out. Titus slowly applauded and said with real respect that it took strong character to do what I had just done, and I told him it wasn't strength, it was love, because sometimes love means letting someone learn to stand on their own. He nodded, smiled, and said the story was over, and I finally smiled for real and said we should celebrate, asking Desmond to bring the special bottle he once gave me years ago, and while he went to get it, I stepped out onto the terrace and breathed in the quiet of my own home. Night had fully settled and the stars above the ocean shone bright and clear, while the surf crashed far below in the darkness. Somewhere on the highway, my soon-to-be ex-daughter-in-law was probably fuming, realizing she had underestimated me, and somewhere out there, my son was finally making his first adult decisions. I stood on my land, feeling the warm stone beneath my feet and breathing in the scent of night-blooming flowers. I was alone, I was free, and yet the story wasn't entirely finished. There was one detail I hadn't shared with even Titus. When I sent the Vances the deed scan, I included another file. Karis's bank statement, which I had acquired through old connections a week earlier when I first suspected her schemes. I had known about the missing money all along, just giving them a chance to act honestly. Now, as Thaddeus sat in the police station ready to open the file with the password I was about to send him, he would see not only the amounts but also the recipients, and one name would shock him. Not a lover, but Tmaine Washington, a fitness trainer receiving $2,000 weekly under the note supplements. I typed the message, sent the password, and smiled at the thought of the surprise awaiting him. Back in the living room, Desmond poured our long unopened brandy and Titus raised his glass. "To a new life," he said. "To freedom," I replied, clinking glasses. My phone pinged again, but it wasn't Sterling or Thaddeus. It was a travel app alert. The price for tickets to Rome had dropped. Rome, the city I had always dreamed of seeing, studied in textbooks but never in person. I looked at my guests and said, "Do you know it's artichoke season right now?" Titus laughed. "Are you going?" he asked. "Tomorrow," I said firmly. But the morning had its own surprise. I had just packed a small suitcase, coffee in hand, ready for my flight, when the insistent knocking came. I wasn't expecting anyone. I walked to the gate, adjusting my sunglasses, and found not Sterling, not Karis, and not the police, but a courier with a huge basket of white roses. And behind him, leaning casually against his SUV, was Titus. "Mr. Banks," I said, raising an eyebrow. "Did you forget your jacket yesterday?" "No, Miss Aaliyah," he replied, smiling and removing his glasses. "I didn't come for things. I came with a proposal," he added, nodding to the courier as I stepped aside to let them in. The courier set the basket of white roses at my feet, and nestled among the blooms was a crisp white envelope. "This is for you," Titus said, stepping closer. "Last night made an impression on me. You rarely meet someone with such strength and love for life." I raised an eyebrow. "And what's in the envelope?" "Another sales contract." He smiled. "No, it's a management contract." He explained that since I was leaving for Italy, he wanted to rent Indigo Point for the summer at a very good rate. But with one condition. I would occasionally advise him on the roses so he wouldn't ruin them. I laughed, a sound full of lightness I hadn't felt in years. He added quietly that he could also keep an eye on the house to make sure no unwelcome relatives returned. It was perfect. The house cared for, the garden safe, extra funds for my travels, and security guaranteed. I agreed and shook his hand. An hour later, I was in a taxi, leaving the villa behind, knowing Titus would tend the roses and protect the home from the ghosts of the past. The sea sparkled as the house receded from view. My phone pinged. A message from Sterling. He had filed the report. Karis had been detained for disorderly conduct on the highway, and the truth about the loans had come out. He was renting a room and looking for work, but he promised to handle it. I smiled and replied, "I believe in you. You'll manage. See you in a month. I'll bring you an Italian tie. Love you." Then with finality I blocked Karis's number forever.